Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next expert talks talk about content on the subject of continuous delivery. I'm John Dickinson, Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts. So the talk this evening, just a bit of a preamble. So over the last 2 months, HMRC has demonstrated it is possible for a government department to deliver new digital services at pace and at scale. This is evidenced by, on the 20th of April, the digital service to support the job retention scheme was launched only 4 weeks after being announced. On the 13th of May, the second digital service enabling applications for the self-employment income was made live, again, weeks ahead of schedule. And then most recently, the 26th of May, the third digital service to take applications for coronavirus sick pay was launched. And this evening, I am delighted to invite Ben Conrad, who's the head of agile delivery for the multi-channel digital tax platform at HMRC, to talk about how their digital tax platform has supported the rapid launch of these COVID-19 services. So thank you very much, Ben, and I will hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. I was on a call earlier with a lot of senior HMRC people, and it was like none of them had ever been on a video call before in their lives. They kept failing to come off mute or having their laptops reboot and things, but hopefully this will work okay, not least because it's the only thing I've been doing for the last kind of 100 days. I think a lot of other talks in this series are being polished affairs. They've been delivered a number of times previously and probably related to the topic in hand. Please lower your expectations. This has been hastily thrown together and is likely to ramble around all over the place. I did want to do this talk though, because there's some really interesting things to learn about how HMRC have utilized continuous delivery. But I've been really busy since lockdown started and haven't had the time I would have liked to have taken to get this right. Views of my own, I suspect this will become obvious, but just thought I'd put that on there. Anyway, expectations set, I'll crack on. As I said, my name's Ben Conrad. I have a range of job titles at HMRC, but the one I get paid for is Head of Agile Delivery Management for MDTP. Behind me in this photo is the office building that opened last September. It is now closed. One day we might get back there. I'm not sure kind of who the audience for this talk is, so if anybody isn't completely familiar with all the acronyms, we do specialize in them, I'm afraid. HMRC is HM Revenue and Customs. It's the tax agency for the British government. In any news story on the internet about us, a variant of this image will be used. It's the only one that comes up. MDTP is the multi-channel digital tax platform. I still don't know what the other channels are. Upon this platform, all of HMRC's public-facing digital services reside. I'll no doubt call it the tax platform or just the platform at various points. There's a story behind this image. The punchline is that I paid someone 30 quid for it. Head of Agile Delivery Management on MDTP. And I have this rather convoluted job title for a couple of reasons. The first is that the civil service digital data and technology profession does not have the concept of a lead delivery manager. It jumps straight ahead to Head of Agile Delivery Management. I cannot explain the brackets. I think of them as air quotes whenever I introduce them myself. The second reason is simply that I was the only person to apply for the role. I've been at HMRC working on MDTP for 3 years. Prior to that, I ran my own company, mostly doing IT support for SMEs. It's basically a heartwarming tale of a white, middle-class, privately educated man finally making it and landing a job in government. You'll be relieved to hear that this is not what I intend to talk about. One final thing I wouldn't normally mention, but given that everyone who can is working from home these days, I do have children. Again, it's not relevant to this talk, but I mention it now only in case one should make an entrance behind my left shoulder. If you do hear shouting or screaming, please be assured there is another adult in the house far more responsible than me, and she's medically trained. In the event of a global viral pandemic, my wife is far more useful than me. Thinking about it, in practically every situation you can conceive of, Martha is far more useful than me. However, we are both notionally key workers. In fact, everyone who works at HMRC, civil servants and contractors alike, were immediately designated key workers. We didn't know at the time why we were being given that designation. It struck me as unlikely that someone who spends their time at work talking to people on video calls, sending emails, would actually be anything other than mostly superfluous worker. What we didn't know was that the Chancellor of the Exchequer was shortly to be throwing billions of pounds at the UK economy, and in the process changing HM Revenue and Customs from the least popular of all government departments to the people you can turn to in your hour of need. This graph, I don't know whether you can see it, it shows the 26th of March, and that really was the first time that we knew that we would be doing anything really for the coronavirus response. So that all kind of brings me to the subject at hand, how continuous delivery enabled MDTP to support the government's response to COVID-19. I'm going to subtitle this, How Come It Wasn't a Complete Disaster? Fairly or unfairly, government IT has a strong reputation for being terrible. Quite frankly, fairly often it is terrible. I think we could all probably name lots and lots of examples of it being done badly. I hope that gradually improvements are being made, because that's the only way that we're going to change our reputation. And also, it's really important that the government can do IT in a decent way. I also believe the reputation of HMRC is different from a lot of other government departments. I think we've been on an upward trajectory in recent years, which is only fair, because I'd argue we're now pretty good at what we do. So we knew what we needed to avoid. At the end of March, the Sun newspaper is running articles about the best times throughout the day to claim universal credit, because people were stuck waiting in order to register for it, and they were having to queue on that website for hours. And I can see the door behind me is opening. I'm just going to ignore it. If you get to the stage where this is happening, something has gone very badly wrong. Excuse me one moment. It appears this room is the one with the paper in it. Apologies. When the government first announced a lockdown, MDTP had already been working entirely remotely for about a week. The rest of HMRC Digital moved to remote working on the day the government asked us to work from home if we could work from home. I was curious to see what impact this would have on delivery, and so I looked at one metric we have for that, which is the number of deployments to production that happened before and after lockdown was announced. I was really pleased to see that the number of deployments actually increased. This is only showing a 2-week period, just before and immediately after lockdown. But the numbers actually carried on going in the same direction, and they leveled out with a few minor blips, which I will come to later. I think it's worth pointing out here, some people love working from home. There's no commute, no one microwaving category for lunch, and you sit at your desk with 38 monitors that you already have. For some, though, it means working at the kitchen table with kids who aren't at school, either demanding attention or streaming videos causing the call that you're on to stutter and fail. It really is a mixed bag. HMRC itself took a couple of weeks to reflect on what happened, and then reacted in the way they always do when faced with a difficult situation. They announced a change freeze. I reacted to this change freeze in the way I like to think HMRC pay me to, which is that I ignored it. and I told anyone who asked that it didn't apply to MDTP. Then I followed this up by writing a passive-aggressive post on LinkedIn about how a change freeze is entirely counterproductive. I like to think they get value from me. Fortunately, there are some people within HMRC Digital who are considerably more diplomatic than me, and within a couple of weeks, with a mixture of charm and evidence, the change freeze waiver was formalized and extended to cover the services that run on the tax platform. There are 3 services that were developed completely from scratch. I'll just mention them now. Job Retention Scheme, JRS. Following immediately behind that was the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, SEISS, and the last was the Statutory Sick Pay Rebate, SSPR. The first thing I want to say is that these services were not built by me. They weren't delivered by me. I like to think I played a small role in ensuring the success of each of them, but there were literally hundreds of people involved. Some of these people work for HMRC as civil servants, some of them work for a private company wholly owned by HMRC for complicated reasons I don't think I could adequately explain, even if I wanted to, which I don't. Some of the people working on them were contractors. Some contract work with HMRC through large IT organizations, some work through smaller companies. I might speak about this more later because it's important, but the point I'd like to make at the moment is that there were hundreds of people involved and they all worked together really closely to get these services delivered. The 3 services have some things in common. Firstly, they paid out billions of pounds, getting money into the bank accounts of businesses and individuals. Secondly, they were built from scratch. It's probably about a year's worth of work compressed into about 6 weeks. If we wanted to do this at a nice leisurely pace with a lot of user research and a lot of alpha and beta stages, probably less than a year, but it would certainly take longer than it did. Thirdly, I'm confident that no one would disagree when I say that it would not have been possible to do this without having the tax platform to run them on. I'm sure the advice before you give any sort of talk like this is to know your audience. It's good advice. However, it's not advice I've been able to follow today. I did join some of the earlier calls to try and find out who I might be talking to, but it didn't help. So please excuse me if I'm pitching this wrong. I think it would be useful to explain a little bit, and I mean a little bit, about what MDTP is. MDTP is a PaaS, a platform as a service. It's been around for over 7 years, probably 8 years now. There have been a number of iterations. We're about to completely overhaul it again for what's likely the 4th time. MDTP is built and operated in a hyperscale cloud provider who used to be known for selling books. We moved to AWS at the end of 2017. And in the next few weeks, we'll be migrating all of our services, and there are a lot of them, from deployment tooling that was written 7 years ago in-house to running on ECS. Everything we do on MDTP is built by the platform teams, operating with freedom to choose their own flavor of agile development, but all of them doing continuous delivery. The teams are based around areas of functionality such as infrastructure, telemetry, build and deploy, and they each have ownership of the services and tools that they provide. Here's a part of that whole other talk I mentioned. This is the most important point though. The entire reason for the existence of MDTP is to serve the needs of our users, who are the teams that develop digital services for HMRC. When we look to provide the digital delivery teams, what we look to provide the digital delivery teams is not just a web hosting service, and we're not in the business of just giving them an AWS account. What we want to deliver for our users are the tools that enable them to do continuous delivery themselves. We want to deliver mechanisms by which they can continuously iterate, deliver bug fixes and new features with the least friction possible. There are 3 points I'd like to make about how MDTP does this, which I think are pertinent. The first is the scale at which we operate. So we have about 120 different digital services. It rather depends on how you count them as to how many there actually are. Each digital service will be composed of a number of different microservices. This chart shows the number that we have kind of currently running in each environment. There may be lots of difficulties in setting up any team doing continuous delivery, but I think it's relatively straightforward to get, you know, a small team or two doing it, depending on the environment in which they're operating. But there really are additional hurdles to doing it at scale. One of the ways that we try and get around that, I suppose, or embrace it even, is that we mandate various tools. So at HMRC, the whole digital community can all use their own tools. Everyone can bring their own device. They can use whatever software they wish on their devices. And yet, we operate an opinionated platform that mandates various things to ensure that everyone is able to work together and everyone is able to work on any digital project. One of those tools is Slack. It's a really important one. There are currently nearly 2,000 members of the HMRC digital Slack instance. Roughly kind of 300 to 400 of those are on guest accounts, so it's around probably 1,600 people working on digital projects. MDTP needs to provide those 1,600 people with what they need to do their jobs, and importantly, good tools that don't lead to hugely frustrated developers battling our tool set and trying to find ways to work around it. It means that we need to constantly assess whether we're striking the right balance in what we provide between restricting people and giving them the really successful ways of doing things. It's what one of my colleagues describes as corralling people into the pit of success. To this end, MDTP is a Scala shop. Nearly all code running on MDTP must be written in Scala. In terms of databases, nearly all services can only talk to MongoDB. We prescribe GitHub, Jira, Confluence, and CI/CD pipelines are all pre-configured in Jenkins. Logs and metrics are pulled from all the hundreds of microservices that are running on MDTP today, stored centrally, and everyone uses Grafana and Kibana to visualize these. We do this to try and ensure that it's really hard to fail. Beyond the technical, digital delivery teams are all using agile methodologies, mostly Scrum, and although MDTP don't police that, I don't think we want to, we do work closely with the digital delivery centers to ensure that best practice is spread about. The second point is about giving that technology a focus. I've said on MDTP, we're focused on giving our users, the digital delivery teams, a really good experience. There are lots of aspects to this, but I'll pick up on a few big ones. We need to be reliable. If the platform goes offline, we bring down about 120 digital services. That results in about 2,000 people on Slack wanting to know what is happening. It would also involve a steadily growing number of increasingly senior people in government wanting to know why the service that they care most about is not available. Most importantly, it would mean that citizens can't file their tax returns, can't claim tax credits or use their tax-free childcare accounts. Businesses can't use PAYE, and in the future, they won't be able to file customs declarations. We need to be considerate. I mean, we're lovely people. If we mandate a change that is needed for each microservice, that can involve teams needing to make a change in over 1,000 different repositories. We try really hard to do this hard work on behalf of teams, ensuring that when we make a change, it can happen transparently without the service teams needing to do anything. We can't always do this, but as an example, our migration to ECS will not involve any work for the service teams and should be entirely seamless. We've done a lot of work to make it smooth and a lot of testing to ensure it succeeds, hopefully. I mean, that's a different talk again. The intention is that this allows the digital delivery teams to focus on their users, taxpayers, citizens, businesses of this country. Each digital delivery team will have the full gamut of developers, team leads, user researchers, designers, a full agile team working together to build the best service they can. and then gathering feedback and iterating to make it better. The third point is culture. There are so many aspects to this, I don't really know where to start. It appears to me that people can assume that a good culture is developed by accident and it'll just continue. This is not true. A good culture develops because a lot of interested people work really hard to try and cultivate it. And actually, I wasn't going to say this, but that's one of the things that EE really excels at. That's not to say that people don't enjoy doing that gardening, but it does take effort. One thing I mentioned earlier, we have contractors and civil servants working together, and on MDTP, the teams we have are blended with contractors from different suppliers, including equal experts. This has advantages in terms of protecting HMRC from being locked in with a single supplier, but it also helps the culture because we're all working together, tackling the problems that we face together. In most cases, I genuinely don't know who any individual is ultimately being paid by. It's not any importance to getting JIRA tickets progressed. And there will normally be civil servants working on every team because the work the teams do is determined by HMRC. We're not outsourcing the work to a single third party. We have a number of advantages in the public sector that I suspect help a lot. There are downsides as well. Firstly, we have support across the civil service for being inclusive, diverse, respectful. These things are written in the Civil Service Code of Conduct, but more than the words in a document, they're actively promoted by loads of people. One other big part is, whatever the government of the day, there are people drawn to work in public service, even at HMRC. Taxes are never going to be hugely popular, but people can appreciate when they're well administered, I hope. Beyond that, of course, government revenues are what fund everything else. There's a mixture of people, permanent staff, contractors, whether they're paid PAYE on a meager government salary or a healthy day rate via one of our suppliers. I genuinely hope that they all feel valued. I like to think that at MDTP, we have a group of hugely talented people and they all enjoy the way in which we work as well as the atmosphere we have. Some individuals probably think the atmosphere is better with everybody working remotely. So back to COVID. Couple of questions I wanted to answer, I guess. Why did it not go horribly wrong? MDTP is good. I mean, it's really quite good. We have some really, really great people. One of the developers on MDTP who, well, a lot of people on this call will know anyway, because he works at EE, Joel Panishka, wrote a blog post that he's written, he shared a blog post on how his team was able to build services rapidly. And this was for the COVID-19 services. He mentions a lot of things I don't have time to go into, and some of them I don't really understand, but I'd like to highlight a few. Sorry, that was his blog. The ease of communication on MDTP, I've mentioned how we use Slack a lot. We use temporary channels. We have a dedicated channel for developers working on COVID services to have a direct line to platform engineers. We have a strong naming convention. It all helps. Gerald also highlighted, and I think this is really important, we make everything we can self-service. Normally just means a pull request in GitHub or a pre-configured job on a Jenkins server. As Gerald wrote, build and deploy allows self-service of the build pipeline. Telemetry allow self-service of pre-configured dashboards, which we automatically populate with whatever logs and metrics your new service is generating. Testing is self-service, deployments are self-service. The things that are not self-service, we are working to make self-service. And the reason we do this is because it allowed Gerald to get on with writing code, and he got a service built in about a day, or knowing Gerald, probably about a night. Another important factor with the new COVID-19 services was that a decision was made really quite early on, before a line of code was written, to host everything possible on MDTP. This was a bit of a step change. HMRC has always been extremely reluctant to store any customer data on MDTP, which means the vast majority of services on the tax platform need to make calls to the legacy IT estate. This part of the HMRC estate is running on old physical servers. They are impossible to scale to cope with the levels of traffic that we knew we could expect. We didn't have a lot of information about how much traffic we could expect, but we knew it was going to be a lot. I guess the comparison would be with SA peak, which happens every year. It's a big peak of traffic, but we can look at the last year and kind of do plus or minus 5%, and that will probably be fine. With these new services, we were flying blind. I'm really hoping that the precedent we're setting about storing the data securely means that in the future it will be possible for MDTP to master increasing amounts of data. COVID-19 teams were working really hard. They were working hand in glove with MDTP. Though we try to ensure everything is self-service, the platform needs to be responsive to new requirements. Take a few of these as examples. The load testing required, again, we didn't know what levels to load test for, but it was at a level that a single instance of Gatling wasn't going to be able to provide, so Build and Deploy added features to enable load testing in parallel. That generated a lot of logs, so telemetry then needed to be scaled up in staging and production to handle the increase in logs being generated. I'm saying that like it's a big thing. I mean, they're really very good at this stuff now. But they're all really great examples of collaboration. You know, the COVID-19 service teams told us that you know, they needed this. We provided it as soon as we could. For some of the services, our PlatOps team were helping to build features, and indeed writing entire microservices for features the service team did not have time to add in. At this point, you might be asking, what was my role in this? I mean, the DevOps engineers were ensuring the platform is ready, developers are writing the services. I'd like to think I played a part in helping to make decisions about the best way to achieve things. But in all honesty, and somewhat depressingly, I suspect the most useful thing I did was provide cover to people doing the delivery. Where HMRC Digital has made horribly slow progress is not in delivering fantastic scalable IT and services, it is in convincing the rest of the department that our ways of working are the thing that has enabled this to be achieved. I spent a lot of time, I will never get back, gathering with tens, 20, 30, 50 other people on a conference call, trying not to get angry as people were asking variants of, you know, are we nearly there yet? Are we over halfway yet? Is MDTP green? If you add up the hours of well-paid people on these calls, they are hugely expensive, and I have no idea what they're supposed to achieve. There was no value provided by them that I could discern. There were days when I was supposed to spend literally hours on them. You'll probably not be surprised to learn that I stopped dialing in. I'd like to note we did have some nervous moments when things could have gone quite badly wrong. There were a lot of late nights. There were a lot of early mornings. There were a lot of very tired developers. It is not a good way of developing services, and we should not be trying to emulate that. With one of the services, there was also an enormous peak of traffic at midday that HMRC were entirely responsible for generating ourselves. MDTP was perfectly able to handle this traffic, but Government Gateway was not. The reason, sorry, I should mention, Government Gateway is what everybody needs to use to log in and authenticate onto the platform. The reason for this peak was because HMRC decided to stagger the traffic by notifying people of a specific day on which they could make their claim. This is for the self-employed income support. That was in itself entirely sensible. However, splitting that traffic in two by giving people a time from which they could claim, either 8 AM or 12 PM, was entirely self-defeating. It turns out that 8 AM is too early for a lot of people to log on to an HMRC website, even if it's to claim money. But midday is ideal. And so hundreds of thousands tried to log in at the same time. I had thought to end this talk with some vanity statistics. There are some big numbers. They're being tweeted out by HMRC and the Treasury. Instead, though, I'd like to end it by paying tribute. Continuous delivery helped, agile methods helped, having some really big instances in AWS helped, but mostly this was possible because of the people we have working here. People who, for a couple of months, were going so far over and above what we could have asked, time and time again. Honestly, it was like they enjoyed working here or something. We have had a load of amazing feedback from digital teams, from people across HMRC, and indeed the Chancellor. Rather amazingly, HMRC got positive reports in the media. Most importantly, the users had a good experience, and the customer satisfaction rating is around 97%. That's astonishing, although it does turn out, if you're running a website to give away billions of pounds, it makes you very popular. Last one, I promise. Just to mention that there was one bit of praise which did rather stick out. Personal hero. And that's it.
That's excellent. Thank you, Ben. Excellent talk. Thank you so much. I mean, it's really interesting to hear about the technology and use on the tax platform, but I especially like the culture element and the way you were calling out the importance of the same way Gerald was about what's in place to enable people to work together and just get work done. That's really, really excellent. Thank you. So what we are going to do now is we're going to move into the fishbowl part of the evening, and we've got one question in here already. But if people can, just while we get ourselves sorted out, if you go through, have a think about the talk. If there's any questions that you would like the panel to discuss and talk about, then please do add them in the Q&A box. It could be around continuous delivery in general, or they could be about working at HMRC or digital tax platform. Great, we've got another one. Thank you, Ali. And if everybody wants to jump into the Q&A section and do some upvoting, then I will pick off the top one, and then we'll go to and I'll ask it to the panel, then they can respond. And then if everybody else, if anybody in the audience does want to join the panel and take part in the discussion, remember, you can just put your hand up. There's a Zoom feature to raise hand, and Steve, who is in the background, will bring you in, bring you into the panel. Okay, great. So the first question we have here is from Lindsay Brewer. Lindsay is one of our speakers from previous. Actually, he's the first person to speak twice at Expert Talks Online since we started the series. So Lindsay's asking, what impact did Rishi's March spike, shown at the very start? So wind your way all the way back to the first slide almost. What impact did Rishi's March spike have on the platform? Did you see it coming, and did you have to make any preparation for it?
I think that's one for Ed.
Sorry, I'm terrible with dates, so I was just trying to think about it. We did see it coming in terms of we were given a certain amount of time to build these services, but ultimately, I guess the platform is built with various principles in mind. You know, we aim to be resilient to spikes like this, because HMRC traffic is very spiky and is very seasonal. So whilst there was a certain amount of the platform just being able to cope with it, there were a lot of conversations to make sure that we could get as good an idea as possible as to what it might look like when they might happen. But it's actually very difficult because, as Ben said, you can't always account for human behaviour. You can plan when you're going to release information, but you can't necessarily plan for how people are going to respond to that. Does that answer the question?
If I can just jump in again, sorry, I've done a lot of talking. That particular spike in March that I had up on the screen came at about 5:30 in the evening, and I think it was Rishi Sunak doing the coronavirus briefing. And it was the first time that he had announced, I think, whether it was JRS or SEISS or whether it was both of them together, I can't remember. But I remember there was a lot of chat, again on Slack, of people saying, whoa. And we had no forewarning of that at all. We did not know, or I certainly didn't know, that the tax platform was going to have to be hosting services to enable an economic response to the pandemic. We certainly hadn't scaled up anything, and immediately after that, the spike was caused by a whole load of self-employed people going off to check how much they thought they'd be able to get in a grant. We didn't know that was coming, and the platform just coped with it without any problems at all.
I do remember kind of all of us watching the broadcast, because I feel like at that time people were watching the broadcast. I don't know if people still do anymore, but it did feel like a moment of, wait, is he talking about us? Are we going to have to do something now? And I will say, I don't know if that's completely foreign to the rest of government. I have worked in teams where you'll see something and then you'll realise, oh, I think that's our team they're talking about.
Yeah, I found that it really reminded everybody about what we're doing and the impact and the scale that it has. So throughout that process, this wasn't the first and only spike caused by the media. So we'd see spikes wherever Rishi Sunak spoke generally when he was delivering the briefing. We saw several spikes when Martin Lewis would go onto the telly or the radio advising people what to do. And it was a great reminder of how close we are to touching the public and the things that we're developing in this instance. But yeah, we were all relieved to see that these spikes generated by the media were nothing special. They were easily copable with the platform, and certainly very small in comparison to things like the self-employed income support scheme spike, which was massive.
Excellent. All right, that's great to hear. So we've got a number of other questions rolling in now, so we'll close off on that one. The next question is from Ali Locher. Thanks. This has been a superb talk. And can you please share your favorite that is shareable? That definitely needs a quote. So shareable account of the cover you provided when you decided MDTP should ignore the change freeze.
So I think this is probably aimed at me, and I probably need to answer it. I'm very, very lucky in that I have a high degree of support from other people within the HMRC digital community. There is a barrier between HMRC digital and the rest of HMRC, and depressingly, a lot of those barriers are ones that have been erected by ourselves. We are kept outside in a way that I think is really counterproductive to what we should be aiming to achieve. But there are some, as I mentioned, there are a lot of ways of working which clash with the ways in which we try to get things done. And particularly when you're trying to get things done at pace, you just can't do the process is king style. I do understand though, and I have quite a lot of sympathy, because it's really hard to see how the ways that we work do operate at scale. And I think unless you're embedded in it, we've not done a good enough job of talking about it. So no, I think The cover that I provided is just, you know, it's the role of a product owner, really. In an organization like this, I think it is to be an umbrella over the team. You know, you're always told product owner prioritizes the backlog. Okay, but you know, once you've done that in the morning, you've got to find something else to do. And you have to engage with your stakeholders. Sometimes those can be really positive engagements, and sometimes it's more about explaining that we're going to do something different.
That's great, and so I think it's a really important element of providing cover for teams so they can do good work. And I guess it's the difference between the a lot of what continuous delivery puts in place for you is a lot of those safeguards to allow you to move faster, and the capabilities in the platform provide safeguards to allow you to move in a different way. And I can very much understand if people don't have those safeguards, why they'd be more nervous. Excellent. All right. Thank you. So then we have got so from Rishi Shah saying, great talk, really enjoyed it. So now you've been able to build a service from scratch in such a short time frame. Are you under pressure from stakeholders or other areas of HMRC to ensure services can be delivered to those same tight timescales? Is it recognized? So to replay, is it recognized when you were saying about the extraordinary effort that people went to, that's also recognized? Are people feeling any more pressure to achieve the same results again?
Is Ben tapping out of this one? Do you think you've been talking too much? I can take this one for you. The answer is yes. And I think even the Chancellor stated, you know, a sort of, wow, this is great. Why can't we do this all the time? Which is scary, because Ben kind of touched on it. The burnout that some of the engineers were feeling was quite scary at times. Like, I know as a delivery lead, you always think, you know, you want your team to work at the best they can, and that includes their well-being. And there were times where, you know, even platform engineers are working way late in the night, you know, working weekends, and we were all trying to figure out, like, is this too much? Do we need to pull them away? And often it was the engineers themselves saying, no, I want to do it, because they felt this calling, because it was, you know, like, we want to be part of this response. This is great, but you never want to put, you know, an engineer in a position of potentially being burnt out. And that was just the platform teams. I cannot imagine, I mean, I've heard, you know, when speaking to them, the amount of work that some of the digital service teams were doing. You know, I think they were pretty much working 6 weekends straight, well into the evening. And you've just kind of, what happens, like, we couldn't turn off when those services, you know, went live, right? Like, we had to stay on, we had to continue, and we ran the risk of that kind of falling apart. So it's not the right way to work, as Ben said.
Ed, you unmuted. Were you going
to? Yeah, sorry. I was just going to follow up on that and say, I think it's a really important thing. You know, Ben touched on it and so did Nerea, but the culture of MDTP, an incredible amount of work goes in to make it a place where the culture is sustainable. You know, and I think that's one of the things that helps. You know, it helps teams build up momentum. It helps attract talented engineers, and, you know, a diverse group of engineers. And, you know, as someone who's worked there myself, you know, it's somewhere that you want to be. And I think that's a really important thing, you know, and to feel a pressure that you would have to work at that rate, you know, it's just not sustainable at all, you know, long term. And I think it's a really important thing to kind of to share that information outwards and upwards, because I think if we were doing that all the time, we wouldn't have been able to put that extra effort in. You know, if that was the norm, people would just have been burnt out. Whereas we were able to kind of burst capacity for that short period of time because we don't do it on a day-to-day basis. And again, that's not to say that things don't get done. I think actually teams have a great momentum because they're not doing that all the time. But yeah.
I think I'd add to that, the culture is really important, and again, it's one of these areas where we clash sometimes with the rest of HMRC. Sorry, going back to the last question, I think that we have set an example of what can be achieved, and I think there are people who believe that this is repeatable, and there are going to be extensions to existing services, and I've heard rumours that there are going to be new services which I'm not allowed to talk about, and I don't think that anybody's going to be saying, yeah, it's fine, let's leave them for 6 months, because actually, you know, it's not that people are doing this just to put engineers under pressure. It's because there is a real hard urgency to getting these things done. But going back to Ali's question, I've suddenly remembered the bits of cover that I'm sort of most proud of would be things like coming up to an engineer, joining them on a call at kind of 8 o'clock in the morning and telling them that they have to go to bed now. You know, they've been up all night, and that no, I don't want them working today, and it's fine. We will pay them for the hours they've worked, and please, please, please go and get some sleep. And I think similarly, it's when you get dragged onto these calls I mentioned, where people are pestering for updates. And again, they're pestering for updates not because they want to make your life difficult, they're pestering because it's important. And, you know, they probably had the Chancellor asking for them. But you need to say, no, I'm not going to give you an update at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning. I will call you when we have anything to update you with. It's, you know, the whole reporting by exception thing. Yeah, that has yet to take root across HMRC, and it really should.
Yeah, I'd echo everything that Ben's just said. I think it's really it's really difficult to manage this, because in one sense, you saw in the previous few months, it's almost the epitome of what MDTP has been evolved to do, which is rapidly develop tax services and deliver them to the public at hyperscale and do it really well. And I think it's natural that senior stakeholders or the exec team might look at that and, you know, think, well, why can't we do this more often, or operate at this pace more often? I think it's probably legitimate to kind of look at this and think maybe we might do it a bit quicker than we had expected previously, but nothing like the kind of timescales that we've been talking about. And this is where I think you know, Ben comes in, people like Ben, and it's about managing expectations, managing up and providing that cover. And one of the reasons that MDTP has been so successful in my experience and from my perspective is that it's received really fantastic insulation from people that senior stakeholders that are removed from what it is that we do and don't understand about agile ways of working, and are more used to the software and technology world in the 90s and prior to that. So yeah, it's that cover that people like Ben can provide in giving that insulation, fighting change freezes, and educating the people above us to ensure that we look after the teams and ensure that unrealistic expectations are dealt with appropriately.
Okay, that's great.
Hello, can I just jump in here? Because
hey, Gerald. Yes.
Hello. One of the things which I think was a great story as well was how Ben unwittingly brought in the team to sort of, somebody talked about we need some information from somewhere, and Ben turned around and said, oh, you should talk to Gerald because he's got some database thing that.
Oh no, we were just about to find out what Gerald had and why they need to talk to him. Has everybody else lost Gerald? Let's see if we can. Steve, see if we can bring him back. Is he still on the call? Apologies, we'll search for him. No, it looks like we've lost him. I'll ping him and hopefully he can join back in. So if we do manage to get Gerald back on, and then he puts his hand up and we bring him back to the panel, then he can finish his point. In the meantime, I thought he was doing a bit of a double whammy because he's got the next question that's up as well. So I thought he was wanted to answer his own question, which is, so Gerald was asking, how long did it take to design JRS, and how small was the fag packet? I'm assuming that is a.
Yes, I'm happy to answer it by saying that none of us were actually involved in the design of JRS, so it would be a guess. But I do know that from the time that the job retention scheme was announced to the time that I actually first saw microservices actually built and some projects in GitHub was not very long. We're talking a couple of days, I think. I don't know if anyone knows any better and wants to correct me.
It's a pretty simple service though, isn't it? I mean, it's 80% of your earnings. You just have to multiply by 0.8. It's fine.
I was just going to follow on from what Matt said. I was slightly embarrassed. In my role I'm the MDTP infrastructure architect. And I was trying to find a way to say I had absolutely no involvement in the design of that service, because we treat the platform and the tenants so differently. You know, the platform is a product. We try and design it with kind of a strong product view and advertise functionalities, and we focus on designing that. And then we have we have strong opinions which we share to service teams who actually design and deploy and implement their own services. And they called us in for a few chats and said, are these ideas sane, insane, etc., for kind of those sorts of things. But really they just got on and did it, and what we did was provide the tools to allow them to do that.
And I think it relates to Ben's point earlier about the pace at which things were delivered. The services you would normally spend more you would do service design, you would do alpha testing, etc. Oh, sorry, discovery, alpha testing. You're not in that. None of these services are in that world, are they? Having the pressure they're having to get things live. We have got. I'll close that question down. But we've got Gerald back now. Gerald, do you want to finish the point that you were making on the previous question?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say the fact that the culture at MDTP is so open, where you can go onto any Slack channel and add your opinion, which I probably do more than I should, and have access to all the repositories that are used to build everything, means that it's very open in how things are built, why things are built, and if people have problems, the communities that are around where people ask for suggestions, means that I think it was very easy to sort of say, I'm not quite sure what's happening, but I'd like to help. Is there any way that I can help? And I think that was one of the things that made this a success as well, because it really was able to cut across the different suppliers. You don't know who you're working with, whether they're one supplier or another, and I think that's really, really important to the success.
Excellent, thank you. And so, well, we've only got a few minutes left, and we'll go with one last question, which is from Charles Tumwebes. He says, thank you for the great talk, Ben. What metrics did you use? And I think you mentioned evidence to convince the HMRC to sort of confirm the freeze waiver. So what metrics and evidence was used as part of that?
I've just remembered that on the LinkedIn post, I produced a graph and then just wrote underneath that it was entirely made up. So I think the evidence that is most useful with the rest of HMRC is the fact that digital is not responsible for a huge number of outages. That point about MDTP being reliable, we are reliable, and HMRC has HPIs. I'm trying to think what they stand for. It can't be high performance indicator.
High profile incident?
Don't know. Anyway, whatever it stands for, they're bad. We don't want them. And so we are not responsible for very many of them. And I think that's a huge part of how we develop, or how our tenants develop services as well, is, we encourage them to make small regular deployments as small as possible, which reduces the risk of them. And it's really about the point that were something to go wrong, we make them independent, and you should be able to roll back that change very, very quickly. And if you can't, then something has gone wrong and you really should be able to. But if everything's going well and you're making changes, and something bad happens, you roll back, you fix it, you deploy again, all of these things reduce the risk to HMRC. And having a change freeze increases that risk, because things get bundled up together and changes get bigger. And when you release the change freeze, as you are going to have to do ultimately, that's where the pain can come. I like to think that we can tell that story, that we're reliable, and that this is how we manage risk. We don't manage risk by having an army of people looking at it and escalating it up, and something which is a bigger risk has to go to somebody who's paid more in order to sign it off. We want the people who are making the change, who are best placed to know what the risk is around that change, to be in charge of it. So the metric is really that we are reliable, that we are continuing to make a whole load of changes, and there haven't been any outages.
So it is 7 o'clock now, and we are trying to keep strictly to our time, the hour time limits, because everybody's spending so much time on video calls. And so I want to just say thank you very much, everybody, for joining the presentation and the talk this evening. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming to talk. I know a lot of people are interested in hearing about the story of the success over the last couple of months. And thank you to our panelists, Nerea, Matt, and Ed. I think, and you are all have been part of this the journey over the years, but also obviously you've been doing great work for the country over the last few months. So thank you, everybody. And we will continue again next week with more talks. So we have Stuart Gunter next week talking about secure continuous delivery, and the week after that we have Lisa Crispin, who is joining us from the States to talk about a whole team approach to quality assurance in the world of continuous delivery. So hopefully you can join us for those talks, and I will see you again. All right, thanks very much, everybody.